I'm Eleanor Vance, and at 27, I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of my family's dysfunction. I worked 3 jobs, skipped every vacation, and saved for 5 years to build a stable life, and the wedding I always dreamed of. But the night of my engagement party, everything unraveled. My father pulled me aside, demanding I hand over my entire wedding fund. To bail out my brother, when I refused, he slapped me, in front of 70 people. And that moment, it shattered every illusion I ever had about family loyalty. Before I tell you how that night, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose between family and self-respect, hit like and subscribe. You're not alone, and neither was I. I grew up in Maplewood Heights, a seemingly idyllic town upstate New York. From the outside, we looked like the quintessential American family. My father, Arthur, was a charming, always smiling salesman for a big insurance company. My mother, Susan, worked part-time as an office administrator, always baking cookies and volunteering at school events. And then there was my brother, Derek. 2 years older than me, Derek was, without a shadow of a doubt, the golden child. The sun, moon, and stars of their universe. Nothing Derek did was ever wrong. Everything was an opportunity, a learning experience, a finding his path. And then there was me. I was the planner, the saver, the responsible one. The one who quietly got things done, hoping for a nod of approval that rarely came. The dynamic was established so early on, it felt like the air we breathed. My parents, they never really grasped money management. They lived paycheck to paycheck, despite what seemed like perfectly decent incomes. Credit card debt wasn't just common in our house. It was a permanent fixture, a silent, oppressive weight. I remember the hushed, frantic arguments that would erupt late at night, the clinking of ice in glasses, the sharp whispers about bills, about how they'd refinanced our modest home not once, but twice, just to cover mounting debts. They thought Derek and I were asleep, but I wasn't. I was always listening, always absorbing. Derek, God bless him, learned from their example, but amplified it to an alarming degree. By 16, he'd already maxed out his first credit card. One my parents had, bafflingly, co-signed for him. They paid it off, no questions asked. By 18, he'd wrecked not 1, but 2 cars, both relatively new. Each time they were swiftly replaced, no real consequences, just a lot of sighs, and boys will be boys. At 20, he dropped out of the local community college they were paying for, claiming it wasn't his thing. My parents, ever the optimists, called it finding his path. Weren't. I watched this pattern unfold. Year after year, the endless cycle of financial irresponsibility met with boundless parental enabling. And at 18, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never, ever live that way. The summer before I left for college, I practically worked myself to the bone. 3 jobs. I waited tables at the local diner from dawn until noon, then stocked shelves at the neighborhood grocery store in the blistering afternoon heat, and finished my days doing data entry from a tiny, stuffy cubicle late into the night. I saved every single penny, a fierce determination burning inside me, because when I asked my parents about college tuition, they looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Honey, we just don't have anything left. All our resources went into Derek's ventures. You're so smart, you'll figure it out." It stung deeply, but it also galvanized me. While they were paying for Derek's string of failed academic attempts, I was applying for every scholarship under the sun, every single one. I spent hours writing essays, perfecting applications, chasing down recommendations. I graduated with my pharmaceutical science degree with minimal student loans, not because my parents helped, but because I worked throughout college, juggling classes, labs, and part-time jobs, and maintained a 3.9 GPA for my merit scholarships. My education, my future, was solely on me, and I was damn proud of that. After college, that disciplined approach became my bedrock. Frugality wasn't just a habit, it was a philosophy. I shared a cramped apartment with 3 other women to keep costs ridiculously low. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I maintained meticulously, checking the oil and tire pressure like a hawk, knowing that car was my lifeline. I brought lunch to work every single day, packing sandwiches and leftovers, and tracked every single dollar I spent in a small notebook, then later on a spreadsheet. My co-workers, bless their hearts, thought I was extreme, practically monastic. "Eleanor, live a little," they'd say. "Buy yourself a fancy coffee." But I had a plan. a deeply ingrained, unshakable plan. I wanted security. I craved a future where I wouldn't lie awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with anxiety over unpaid bills, just like my parents did. And yes, eventually, I wanted a beautiful wedding. Not a lavish, over-the-top affair, but something elegant, meaningful, and completely paid for. And a home. A stable, secure home with the right partner. So for 5 years, I saved. I put aside at least 30% of every paycheck, religiously, sometimes more. By the time I was 27, I had managed to save a full $50,000, specifically earmarked for my future wedding. It was my nest egg, my symbol of independence, my promise to myself that I would break the cycle. Meanwhile, Derek continued his chaotic dance through life, bouncing from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He tried multi-level marketing for questionable nutritional supplements, then delved into day trading with zero financial literacy, then tried flipping houses with absolutely no construction knowledge. Each venture failed more spectacularly than the last, leaving a trail of debt and broken promises. And each time, like clockwork, my parents were there, their checkbooks open, their retirement savings slowly, steadily being drained. Their hope, I guess, was that this time it would be different. It never was. His latest grand idea, the artisanal coffee distribution business, was supposed to be the one that would make him a millionaire, the one that would finally justify all their sacrifices. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was 3 years ago when I met Liam Hayes at a tech summit focused on medical research applications. I was presenting on data analytics for pharmaceutical trials, and he was a brilliant software engineer, developing programs to streamline drug discovery. Unlike the men I had dated before, men who sometimes seemed threatened by my financial independence or wanted me to abandon my careful habits, Liam respected my financial boundaries. He never pressured me to split bills beyond my budget or to spend money I didn't have. He understood my deep-seated need for security, and incredibly, he even admired my discipline. He saw it not as stinginess, but as strength. When our relationship became serious, I was completely transparent about my wedding fund. I told him about my years of saving, my motivations, my desire for a stable future. Liam was genuinely touched that I had been planning and saving so diligently for our future, even before he was in the picture. It wasn't about the money for him, it was about the intention, the commitment. Once we were engaged, he contributed to the fund too, of course, a generous amount that made our shared dream even more tangible. But the bulk of it, the foundation, was from my years of careful saving. It wasn't just money, it was years of my life, my effort, my dreams. Then came the 2 months before our engagement party. Derek's artisanal coffee business, predictably, collapsed in a spectacular fashion. He had somehow accumulated a staggering $80,000 in debt. I later learned that my parents had already given him $20,000 from their dwindled retirement savings. But it wasn't enough. They were tapped out with their own mounting credit card debt and that second mortgage on the house. I had started noticing my mother calling more frequently, her conversations riddled with increasingly transparent hints. Small talk would quickly pivot to how stressed Derek was, how unfair the business world could be to innovative thinkers like him, how much bad luck he always seemed to have. I recognized the pattern immediately. They were setting the stage. They were going to ask for money. But I never, not in my wildest nightmares, imagined how far they would go. We planned our engagement party at the Grand Arbor Estate, a beautiful venue nestled amidst rolling hills and lush greenery. The fountains were the centerpiece, and I imagined the string lights I'd seen in photos would look magical as dusk settled. I paid the deposit myself, of course, meticulously tracking every expense, and spent weeks coordinating every minute detail. Liam's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, were flying in from Oregon, and our friends were coming from across the country. It was supposed to be perfect, the culmination of everything I had worked for, a celebration of the future Liam and I were building together. The day of our engagement party arrived with a breathtakingly perfect autumn sky. The Grand Arbor Estate looked magical in the early evening light. The fountains created a soothing backdrop of gentle splashing water, a counterpoint to the nervous flutter in my stomach. The fairy lights I had meticulously strung among the trellises shimmered, ready to twinkle once the sun dipped below the horizon. The caterers had laid out beautiful appetizer stations, each small plate a work of art, accompanied by elegant signs I had calligraphed myself. Even the flower arrangements, bursts of deep blue hydrangeas, and pristine white roses reflected months of careful planning, creating the exact aesthetic I had envisioned. Every detail was a reflection of my hope, my effort, my dream. Liam and I arrived early, wanting to ensure everything was absolutely in place. He looked incredibly handsome in his navy suit, a confident smile playing on his lips, and I wore a cream-colored cocktail dress that I had splurged on for this special occasion, feeling elegant and beautiful for the first time in a long time. We walked through the garden hand in hand, stealing kisses behind ancient oak trees, whispering about our future, our upcoming wedding, the house we hoped to buy. In those stolen moments, everything felt utterly perfect. Liam's parents, Marcus and Eleanor Hayes, arrived first. They had flown in from Portland, a testament to their love and support, and were staying at a charming nearby inn. Eleanor, yes, she's an Eleanor too, which always makes us laugh, immediately enveloped me in a warm embrace, telling me I was already like a daughter to her. Marcus, more reserved but equally warm, shook Liam's hand with a firm grip before pulling him into a hug. They presented us with a small, beautifully wrapped box containing his grandmother's pearl earrings. Something blue for the wedding, they'd said. I was so touched by their thoughtfulness, their genuine warmth, their acceptance. It felt like I was finally gaining the family I always yearned for. My parents and Derek arrived a tense 40 minutes later, just as other guests were beginning to fill the garden. My mother, Susan, hugged me stiffly, her eyes darting around the venue as if calculating its cost, a familiar, anxious flicker in her gaze. My father, Arthur, gave me a quick, almost dismissive peck on the cheek, before immediately engaging Marcus Hayes in a loud, boisterous conversation about the stock market, already performing. Derek stood awkwardly to the side, looking uncomfortable in a wrinkled button-down shirt that was clearly too small for him, his eyes downcast. Nice party, Elle, Derek mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. Must have cost a fortune. The implication hung heavy in the air, a familiar accusation disguised as a compliment. I ignored it, choosing instead to offer to show him to the bar. As we walked, I noticed him checking his phone repeatedly, his thumb nervously rubbing the screen, and looking anxiously toward our parents, who were now huddled in a corner. Something felt off. A familiar knot of unease tightened in my stomach. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was my engagement party. I wouldn't let family tension ruin it, not tonight. Throughout the next hour, I mingled with our 70 guests, a blissful blur of well wishes and laughter. My college roommates had driven 3 hours to be there, their excited chatter a comforting presence. My colleagues from the pharmaceutical lab presented us with a beautiful crystal vase, a symbol of their respect. My childhood neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had watched me grow up, dabbed tears from her eyes as she told Liam how incredibly lucky he was. Every time I looked for my parents, though, they seemed to be in deep conversation with Derek, shifting from one secluded corner of the garden to another. My mother's expression grew increasingly distressed, her hands wringing. My father checked his watch repeatedly, his movements jerky, and downed 2 scotches in quick succession, his face already flushing. Derek paced, gesturing emphatically, his voice low and agitated. Something was definitely wrong. Is everything okay with your family? Liam whispered, his brow furrowed with concern, when we managed a moment alone, tucked away near a rose bush. They seem agitated. I'm not sure, I admitted, a sigh escaping me. But whatever it is, it can wait. Tonight is about us. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the growing dread. At exactly 8 p.m., Liam clinked his glass for everyone's attention. The garden fell silent, the gentle splashing of the fountain now the only sound. He began his toast, his voice clear and resonant. He spoke about how we met, our first date at a charming little Italian restaurant where he, adorably, spilled wine on my white blouse, and how he knew I was special when I just laughed it off instead of getting upset. He talked about our shared values, our dreams for the future, the quiet understanding that had grown between us. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to my eyes, he got down on one knee again, even though we were already engaged, and asked me to marry him in front of all our loved ones. The crowd erupted in applause as he slid the ring onto my finger and kissed me, a kiss that tasted like pure happiness. For that perfect moment, everything else faded away. The anxieties, the family tensions, the worries, they vanished. I was happier than I had ever been. After Liam's toast, our friends took turns sharing stories and well wishes. Liam's best friend from college recalled how Liam had called him the day after our first date, absolutely certain he had met his future wife. My best friend Sarah shared how she had never seen me as genuinely happy as I had been these past 3 years with Liam. The joy in the garden was palpable, a warm, bright blanket. As the night progressed and the caterers began to announce that dinner was about to be served, I felt a firm, insistent hand on my elbow. My father. He was steering me toward a small, secluded alcove away from the main party. My mother and Derek followed closely behind, their faces grim. Liam was across the garden, deep in conversation with his college roommate, laughing. I tried to catch his eye, to send a silent plea, but he didn't see me. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice tight, rough. The look in his eyes, a strange mix of desperation and forced authority, made my stomach drop. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. I allowed myself to be led to the secluded corner, the beautiful fairy lights seeming to mock the rising tension. Already I felt the exquisite happiness of the evening beginning to slip away, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. "Eleanor, we need your help," my father began once we were truly isolated in the alcove. His voice was uncharacteristically humble, almost pleading. "Derek is in serious trouble." I looked between them, my father's forced, strained smile, my mother's tearful, imploring eyes, and Derek's sullen, defeated expression staring at the ground. I had seen this tableau many, many times before. It was a well-rehearsed play, and I knew my role was to be the solution. "What kind of trouble?" I asked. My voice flat, already knowing where this was heading. "The business? It just fell apart," Derek mumbled, still refusing to meet my gaze. "I owe some people a lot of money, like they're threatening me kind of money." He shifted uncomfortably, kicking at a loose pebble. My mother stepped forward, her hands clutching mine, her grip surprisingly tight. "Sweetie, we know about your wedding fund." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. A cold, icy feeling spread through my chest, radiating outwards. No, this couldn't be happening. Not tonight. Not ever. "No," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor running through me. "Absolutely not." "Just listen," my father cut in, his tone hardening, losing its earlier humility. "Derek needs $50,000 to pay off these guys. These aren't people you mess with, Eleanor. He could get hurt. Seriously hurt." "And what about my wedding?" I demanded, pulling my hands away from my mother's grasp, the coldness spreading into a full-blown chill. "The one I've been saving for since before I even met Liam? The one I worked extra shifts for, skipped vacations for, scrimped and saved for 5 years? You can have a simple wedding," my mother suggested, as if she was offering a perfectly reasonable, even generous compromise. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a strange, almost demanding glint in them. "Or postpone it a year while you save up again. You're good at saving, Eleanor. You're always so responsible." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so utterly dismissive of my efforts, my dreams. "I've been saving for 5 years, Mom. 5 years of extra shifts, of brown bag lunches, of making every dollar stretch. That money is for my future, for Liam and me, for our stability." "Family comes first," my father said, his voice rising, a sharp edge entering his tone. "Derek would do the same for you." I actually laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound that escaped me before I could stop it. "No, he wouldn't," I stated, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and bitter amusement. "He's never saved a dime in his life, and he's never paid back a single loan you've given him, Dad. Not one." Derek's face darkened, a flash of resentment replacing his earlier sullenness. "That's not fair, Elle. I've had bad luck. Really bad luck." "Bad luck?" I echoed, the anger simmering. "You've had nothing but chances and bailouts. I worked for everything I have, every single thing. I didn't get a golden ticket, Derek. I earned it." I could see a few nearby guests beginning to notice our huddle, the rising tension in our voices. Sarah caught my eye from across the garden, her expression concerned. I gave her a small shake of my head, not wanting to create a full-blown scene. Not yet. "Look," I said, forcing my voice to a quieter, more controlled tone. "I'm sorry you're in trouble, Derek, truly, but that money is spoken for. Liam and I have already put deposits down on venues. We've been planning our life together. It's not just a fund anymore. It's our foundation." My father stepped closer, his imposing frame blocking my path, lowering his voice to a dangerous, barely audible whisper. The smell of scotch was strong on his breath. These people Derek owes, they're serious businessmen, Eleanor, with connections. If he doesn't pay, they'll come after him. They might come after all of us. Is your fancy wedding worth your brother's safety? Worth your mother's peace of mind? The emotional manipulation was so transparent, so cliché, it made me sick. It didn't make me feel guilty. It made me furious. If it's that serious, I shot back, my voice barely above a whisper. Go to the police. We can't, Derek interjected quickly, a panicked look in his eyes. There are contracts, things I signed. Of course there were. Always a loophole, always a reason not to involve the authorities. Always something shady lurking beneath the surface. I took a deep, shaky breath, gathering every ounce of resolve. My answer is no. I'm not giving you my wedding fund. Not a penny. I tried to step around them, but my father blocked my path again, his face growing alarmingly flushed. You selfish little princess, he hissed, his voice laced with venom. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? I countered, the words spilling out, a lifetime of resentment suddenly unleashed. You didn't pay for my education. You didn't help with my first apartment. You've never even asked about my career unless you needed to borrow money, my mother gasped, placing a hand over her mouth as if I'd uttered the most egregious blasphemy. How can you say that? We gave you everything. No, I stated, my voice rising again. You gave Derek everything. I worked for what I have, every single thing. By now, several guests had definitely noticed the confrontation. The hushed murmurs had ceased, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. From the corner of my eye, I saw Liam starting to make his way toward us, concern evident on his face. My father, fueled by scotch and rage, grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, almost painful. You listen to me, he snarled, pulling me closer. You're going to write a check to your brother tonight, right now, or this engagement is off. I wrenched my arm away, my skin burning where his fingers had dug in. You don't get to decide that. This is my life, my money, and my choice. You ungrateful little bitch, he spat, the words slurring slightly, his face contorted with pure hatred. After all we've sacrificed for you. Several gasps came from nearby guests, who could now clearly hear us. My mother was crying openly, mascara streaking down her cheeks, making no move to defuse the situation, utterly useless as ever. Derek just stood there, looking both embarrassed and oddly expectant, as if he still believed I might give in, that this was just part of the negotiation. I'm not giving you my money, I stated firmly, my voice remarkably steady now. Not now, not ever. Now please, let's not ruin this night. I tried to step away one last time. What happened next seemed to unfold in excruciating slow motion. My father's face, already purple with rage, contorted further. His right hand came up, swinging toward me in a wide, desperate arc. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through the suddenly silent garden. It was a sickening, brutal sound. The force of the blow knocked me backward, and I stumbled against a decorative stone column, my head hitting the cold surface with a dull thud. The shock was overwhelming. My father had never hit me before, not once in 27 years. My cheek burned, a fiery pain radiating across my face, and I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. The entire party, all 70 pairs of eyes, were now fixed on me, on my humiliation, on the grotesque display of my family's dysfunction. Liam's parents stood with their mouths open in horror, their faces pale. Sarah, my quick-thinking best friend, had her phone in her hand, raised, and I realized dimly that she had recorded the whole thing. Every word, every escalating threat, the slap, all of it. Liam reached us in seconds, a primal fury in his eyes, placing himself protectively between me and my father. Don't you ever touch her again, he said, his voice shaking with a cold, terrifying rage. My father seemed momentarily stunned by his own actions, by the sudden, stunned silence of the crowd. But he quickly recovered, his chest still heaving. This is family business. Stay out of it. I straightened up, touching my cheek gingerly. A strange, almost eerie calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The shame, the hurt, the shock, they coalesced into a steely resolve. I looked my father directly in the eyes, my voice quiet, almost a whisper, but filled with an unshakable conviction. You're about to get a surprise you'll never forget. Then, without another word, I walked past him, past my sobbing mother and my gaping brother, toward the garden exit, pulling out my phone as I went. Behind me, I heard my mother calling my name, a desperate, broken sound. I heard Liam's voice, firm and commanding, telling my father he needed to leave. I heard Derek, ever the apologist, trying to defend our father, claiming I had provoked him, that it was just a family disagreement. The familiar lies, the familiar enabling. But none of it mattered anymore. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm, professional voice contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding behind me. I'd like to report an assault, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady, almost detached. At the Grand Arbor Estate in Maplewood Heights. My father just slapped me across the face in front of 70 witnesses. I'm safe now, but I'd like officers to come. As I gave the dispatcher the details, the address, my name, a brief description of my father, I watched the scene in the garden through the decorative wrought iron fence. Liam was still standing protectively between my family and the rest of the guests, his parents flanking him like ancient stoic sentinels. My father was gesturing wildly, his face purple with rage, his words slurring even more noticeably now. My mother was crying into her hands, her shoulders shaking, and Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the manicured hedges. The rest of the guests stood in awkward clusters, some openly staring, others pretending to be engaged in conversation while stealing nervous glances at the unfolding drama. Sarah broke away from the crowd and hurried toward me, her face a mask of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice hushed, her eyes wide. She held up her phone. "I got it all on video, every word, the slap, everything." I nodded, feeling strangely detached, almost like I was watching a movie of my own life. "I just called the police." Sarah's eyes widened. "Good, that was assault, Elle, in front of everyone." She pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry this happened." Liam spotted us and came over, his face still a mask of concern and lingering fury. "The caterers are serving dinner to try and normalize things," he said, his voice strained. "My dad, Marcus, he kicked your family out of the main garden area. They're by the front entrance now." He gently touched my cheek, which was still bright red, throbbing. "We should get some ice for that." I leaned into his touch, finding immense comfort in his steady presence. "The police are coming." He nodded without hesitation. "Good, I'll support whatever you want to do, whatever you decide." This was why I loved him. No questioning, no trying to talk me out of it. No guilt trips, just unwavering support. We could hear sirens in the distance now, growing louder with each passing second. My father must have heard them too, because he suddenly appeared at the garden entrance, my mother and Derek trailing behind him, looking terrified. "You called the police?" he shouted, his voice slurring more noticeably now, his anger escalating into something desperate and unhinged. "Over a little family disagreement? Have you lost your mind, Eleanor?" "You assaulted me in front of 70 people, Dad," I retorted, my voice ringing with clarity and defiance. "That's not a disagreement, that's a crime." "I barely touched you," he protested, looking around wildly as if seeking support from the empty air. "Tell them, Susan, it was just a tap." My mother looked torn, her loyalty to my father warring with what she had witnessed, what she knew in her heart. "Robert, you did hit her pretty hard," she admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Whose side are you on?" he snapped at her, his face turning an even deeper shade of crimson. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing, painting the manicured garden in stark, intermittent blues and reds. 4 officers got out immediately, their expressions professional, assessing the situation with trained eyes. "I'm Officer Miller," said the female officer who approached us first, her voice calm and authoritative. "We received a call about an assault." "That would be me," I said, stepping forward, drawing strength from Liam's hand in mine. My father slapped me during my engagement party when I refused to give my brother my savings. Officer Miller nodded professionally, taking out a notepad and pen. "And your father is that man there?" I pointed to where my father stood, now attempting to straighten his tie and compose himself, trying to embody the image of an innocent, aggrieved party. "Arthur Vance." The officers split up, two staying with me and Liam to take my statement, while the others approached my father. I explained everything, from the history of financial manipulation, the endless bailouts for Derek, to the escalating confrontation at the party, and finally, the violent assault. Sarah, without being asked, showed Officer Miller the video she had captured. "That's pretty clear evidence," Officer Miller said after watching it, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. "Would you like to press charges, Ms. Vance?" I hesitated, but only for the briefest of moments. The memory of the sting on my cheek, the public humiliation, the years of silent suffering, it all flashed through my mind. This was it. The line had been crossed. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "Yes, I would." Across the way, I could see my father becoming increasingly agitated as the officer spoke to him, his voice, still slurred, carried across the garden entrance. "This is ridiculous. A father can't discipline his daughter anymore. She's trying to let her brother suffer when she has the means to help him." One of the officers was speaking into his radio, and I caught fragments about visible intoxication and combative behavior. "There's something else you should know," I told Officer Miller, remembering a detail that suddenly felt incredibly important. I had security cameras installed around the garden for the event. The venue manager helped me set them up because we have gifts and personal items here. They should have captured everything from multiple angles. Officer Miller raised her eyebrows, a hint of impressed surprise in her eyes. "That was smart planning, Miss Vance. Can we access that footage?" I nodded and waved over Mr. Albright, the venue manager, who had been hovering nearby, looking distressed but trying to remain discreet. He quickly confirmed that the security system had been recording all evening and led two officers to the control room. My father's face, when he realized there were security cameras, was a chilling mix of shock and fear. For the first time that evening, he seemed to truly understand the gravity of what he had done. The performance shattered, replaced by genuine terror. While we waited for the officers to review the footage, Liam brought me an ice pack for my cheek, pressing it gently against the throbbing redness. His parents, Marcus and Eleanor Hayes, came over, their faces still filled with concern. They assured me they didn't blame me for the disruption, not for a second, and were appalled by my father's behavior. "No one should be treated that way," Eleanor said firmly, her voice soft but resolute. "Especially not by family." Their unwavering support was a balm to my raw nerves. About 15 minutes later, Officer Miller returned with her partner, their expressions grave. "The footage confirms your account, Ms. Vance," she stated. "It's very clear. We're going to take your father into custody for assault." As if on cue, the other officers approached my father, who had been sitting sullenly on a decorative bench, seemingly deflated. When they asked him to stand and put his hands behind his back, he exploded again, a final desperate burst of indignant rage. "This is insane! She's my daughter. I paid for her to be born. I put clothes on her back. You can't arrest me for disciplining my own child." "Sir, your daughter is 27 years old," one officer said calmly, his voice unmoved. "And striking another adult is assault, regardless of your relationship." As they handcuffed him, my father's eyes, wide with disbelief, turned to me, filled with a look of pure betrayal. "How could you do this to your own father?" he rasped, his voice thick with self-pity. "For money?" "It's not about the money, Dad," I replied, my voice clear and loud enough for him to hear, for everyone to hear. "It's about respect and boundaries, and the fact that you thought it was okay to hit me because I wouldn't do what you wanted." As they led him toward the waiting police car, his head down, he suddenly blurted out, seemingly without thinking, "The debt collectors will come after all of us. They know where you live, Eleanor. They know where you work." Officer Miller paused, her hand already on the car door, and turned back. "What debt collectors would these be, sir?" My father clamped his mouth shut, suddenly realizing he had said too much, his eyes widening in panic. But Derek, perhaps seeing an opportunity to shift blame, or just too terrified to keep quiet, jumped in, his voice trembling. "Just some guys Dad borrowed money from for my business. They're kind of in the gambling world." The officers exchanged meaningful glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We're going to need more information about that," one said, her gaze now fixed on Derek. As my father was placed in the back of the police car, the reality of what had just happened began to truly sink in. My own father was being arrested at my engagement party, The celebration was ruined, irrevocably tainted, and apparently there was an even darker secret lurking beneath the surface, involving illegal gambling debts and dangerous connections. My mother approached me cautiously, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. "Please, Eleanor," she begged, her voice hoarse. "Drop the charges. He didn't mean it. He's just desperate because of the money. These men have threatened him." "What men, Mom?" I asked, my voice filled with a new kind of dread. "What has Dad gotten himself into?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know all the details. He's been borrowing to help Derek, but also to cover some betting losses. It just got out of hand." I shook my head in disbelief, a sickening feeling churning in my stomach. So this wasn't even just about Derek's business failing. Dad had a gambling problem too, and it was connected to something far more sinister than I could have imagined. "It's not a problem," she insisted weakly, her voice thin. "He just had some bad luck." The familiar refrain, "bad luck," sent a wave of exasperation through me. Bad luck, that's what it always was. Bad luck isn't a pattern that lasts decades, Mom. That's called consequences. As the police cars drove away with my father, their flashing lights fading into the autumn night, and the remaining officers continued to take statements from willing witnesses, I looked around at the beautiful garden. The fairy lights still twinkled. The fountain still burbled peacefully, but everything had changed. The magic was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of violation and profound sadness. Liam put his arm around me, pulling me gently closer. "What do you want to do now?" he asked softly, his voice full of concern and understanding. I leaned into him, suddenly exhausted, the emotional toll of the evening catching up to me. "I want to thank everyone for coming, apologize for the drama, and go home. This party is over." The week following my engagement party was a blur of police statements, tearful, guilt-laden phone calls from my mother, and awkward explanations to friends and colleagues who had witnessed the debacle. Liam, true to his word, took time off work to support me, fielding calls, bringing me food, and helping me process the profound shock and betrayal. He was my rock, my anchor in a sea of chaos. 3 days after the arrest, Officer Miller called me with disturbing news. The investigation into my father's gambling debts had uncovered a pattern of illegal activity stretching back almost a decade. "Your father has been involved with an underground gambling ring," she explained carefully, her voice low. "Not just as a patron, Miss Vance, but helping to recruit new players and taking a cut of the profits. That's how he's been supplementing his income to bail out your brother's failed businesses all these years." I sat heavily on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, the air feeling suddenly thin. "Are you saying my father is part of some kind of organized crime?" The words felt foreign, unbelievable, even as they explained so much. "I wouldn't go that far," Officer Miller said diplomatically. "But he's definitely been operating in a gray area of the law for some time. The district attorney is considering adding charges of illegal gambling, and possibly even money laundering to the assault charge." This revelation explained so much about our family dynamics over the years. The mysterious business associates, who sometimes called our home late at night, their voices hushed and urgent. The weekends when my father would mysteriously disappear for sales conferences, but return with no new materials or contacts, just a vague sense of having been somewhere important. The seemingly endless supply of cash he always seemed to have, despite our perpetual financial struggles. Despite my mother's constant complaints about money, it was all a facade, all built on deception. More shocking revelations followed the very next day when my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, called me. "I saw what happened on Sarah's social media," she began, her voice filled with a mix of sorrow and a strange kind of relief. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor, but I need to tell you something that might help make sense of all this." She proceeded to tell me that my father had borrowed $15,000 from her 3 years ago, claiming it was for my graduate school expenses. Graduate school. I had never attended graduate school. I had gone straight into my pharmaceutical research job after undergrad. The money, she suspected, had likely gone straight into Derek's failed food truck venture that year. "I always wondered why you never thanked me for helping with your education," Aunt Carol said, her voice filled with a bittersweet irony. "Now I understand. You never knew." This call triggered an avalanche of similar revelations. My father's brother had invested $10,000 in a business opportunity, that my father had presented as my first home down payment. My grandmother had contributed $5,000 to what she thought was a specialist medical procedure I needed that wasn't covered by insurance. Even my cousin had loaned my father $3,000 for what he believed was a car repair, after I had supposedly been in a minor accident. All told, my father had stolen nearly $40,000 from our extended family by using my name and fictional needs as the pretense. No wonder they had seemed so cold to me at family gatherings in recent years. They thought I had taken their money without so much as a thank you. They thought I was the manipulative one. I was devastated and utterly humiliated. Not only had my father been stealing using my identity, but he had also been systematically tarnishing my reputation within the family for years. When I called each relative, one by one, to explain and apologize, most were understanding, relieved to finally know the truth. But the damage to our relationships, built on years of mistrust and false narratives, would take time to repair. A lot of time. Meanwhile, Derek was facing his own reckoning. With my father in legal trouble and my mother frantically trying to secure a lawyer she couldn't possibly afford, Derek was suddenly without his safety net. His creditors were calling, their threats growing more explicit, and there was no parental bailout coming this time. He showed up at my apartment unannounced 5 days after the engagement party, looking haggard, desperate, his clothes rumpled, his hair unwashed. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hoarse, when I opened the door. I hesitated, a familiar wave of resentment washing over me, but something in his eyes, a genuine fear I hadn't seen before, made me step aside to let him in, leaving the door slightly ajar. Liam was due back with dinner any minute, and I wasn't comfortable being alone with any family member right now, especially Derek. Derek paced my small living room, running his hands through his messy hair, clearly agitated. "This is all such a mess, Elle," he muttered, almost to himself. "Dad's lawyer says he could face serious jail time. Mom's a wreck, and these guys I owe money to, they're getting really impatient." "What do you want from me, Derek?" I asked tiredly, crossing my arms. "I've already told you I'm not giving you my wedding fund." I know, he said quickly, almost frantically. "And I get it now. I really do. You worked hard for that money, but maybe you could just loan me enough to make a good faith payment, like $5,000, just to buy me some time to figure things out." He stopped pacing, his eyes pleading. I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? After everything that's happened? After you and Dad tried to coerce me into handing over my life savings? I'm desperate here," he exclaimed, throwing his hands up in frustration. "These aren't nice people, Eleanor. They've started calling Mom too, showing up at her house." "Then go to the police," I suggested, not for the first time. "That's what you should have done from the start." "I can't," he looked genuinely frightened now, his bravado completely gone. "Dad wasn't just helping me with money, Elle. He was introducing me to investors. Turns out some of those investors were using the business to launder money. If I go to the police, I could be implicated too. My business accounts, they were used." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. This was so much worse than I had imagined. Our entire family. "Were you involved in Dad's gambling operation?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. "Not directly, I knew about it. And sometimes I let them use my business accounts to move money around. I didn't ask questions. I just needed the capital, Elle, for my ventures." "Oh my God," I sank onto my couch, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "Our entire family is criminal." "Not you, Eleanor," Derek said, with a hint of bitterness, a familiar defense mechanism. Perfect Cassandra, always following the rules. Before I could respond, the sound of keys jingling in the lock announced Liam's arrival. He walked in, balancing takeout bags, took one look at the scene, Derek looking distraught, me on the couch, the palpable tension, and assessed the situation quickly. He set the food down on the kitchen counter, his jaw tightening, and came to stand beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone making it abundantly clear that he was ready to ask Derek to leave if necessary. "Derek was just explaining how he and Dad were involved in money laundering," I said, too exhausted for subtlety, for sugarcoating. Liam's eyebrows shot up, a silent "I knew it" in his eyes. He turned to Derek, his voice firm, unwavering. "I think it's time for you to go, Derek." "Fine." Derek headed for the door, then turned back, his shoulders slumped. "For what it's worth, Eleanor, I am sorry about what happened at your party. Dad was way out of line." He paused, then added, his voice still tinged with the familiar familial expectation. "But you could have just helped family, Elle. That's what we're supposed to do for each other." After he left, I broke down in Liam's arms. The weight of all the revelations, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and the utter destruction of what family meant to me came crashing down at once. "I don't even know who they are anymore," I sobbed into his shoulder, the tears finally, uncontrollably, falling. Everything I thought about my childhood, about our family dynamics, it was all built on lies and manipulation. Liam held me tightly, stroking my hair. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. No one deserves this." Later that evening, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Your father's bail is set at $25,000. We don't have it. Please help us. He doesn't belong in jail." I showed the message to Liam, who shook his head in amazement. "They're still trying to get your money," he observed, a sad understanding in his voice. "Just in a different way now." I turned off my phone and curled up next to the man who had stood by me through this nightmare, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I need some distance from all of them, I decided. The words a quiet promise to myself. At least until I can figure out what kind of relationship, if any, is even possible going forward. The next day, I contacted a therapist who specialized in family trauma. As I sat in Dr. Lena Thorne's office, explaining the tangled web of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and shattered trust, she listened attentively, her expression kind and understanding, before offering her perspective. "What you're describing, Eleanor, is a deeply dysfunctional family system that's been in place for decades," she explained gently. "Your father and brother as the takers, your mother as the enabler, and you as the responsible one who's always expected to pick up the pieces, to fix everything. Breaking free from that system is incredibly difficult because it disrupts everyone's established roles. It makes everyone uncomfortable, especially those who benefited from the old dynamic." "I just can't believe I never saw it clearly until now," I admitted, a bitter ache in my chest. "Sometimes it takes a catastrophic event to see patterns that have been normalized throughout your life, Eleanor," Dr. Thorne said, her voice empathetic. "The question now is not about them, but about you. What boundaries do you need to set going forward? What does a healthy, fulfilling life look like for you, independent of their expectations?" It was a question I would spend the next several months trying to answer. The criminal case against my father moved forward with unexpected speed. With the video evidence of the assault, Sarah's unwavering testimony, and multiple witness statements from the party guests, the prosecutor had a very strong case. But it was the financial crimes investigation that truly unraveled my father's life. 2 weeks after the engagement party incident, federal agents became involved, following the money trail from the gambling operation into various shady business accounts, including several connected to Derek's failed ventures. My brother wasn't arrested, but he was called in for multiple grueling interviews as a person of interest, the weight of potential charges hanging over him. Meanwhile, I threw myself into therapy with Dr. Thorne, meeting twice weekly. We processed not just the recent trauma of the engagement party, but the lifetime of manipulation I was only now recognizing, peeling back layers of conditioning. The clarity that came with distance and professional guidance was both liberating and exquisitely painful. "I always thought I was the problem," I told Dr. Thorne during our 4th session, a raw vulnerability in my voice. Too rigid, too cautious, too unwilling to help family. I carried this immense guilt, like I was selfish for saying no, but I was just responding to their constant taking, their endless demands. "That's called gaslighting," she explained, her voice calm and steady. "When someone behaves inappropriately, but makes you feel like you're the one with the problem, that you're too sensitive or too selfish. It's a common tactic in emotionally and financially abusive relationships. It keeps you off balance, questioning your own reality, making you easier to control." Her words were like a key, unlocking years of confusion. I began keeping a journal, documenting memories that now appeared in a harsh, revealing new light. The time my father borrowed my first tax refund check when I was 16, promising to return it with interest, but never did. The Christmas when Derek received a brand new car, while I got a sweater and a dismissive, "because you're more practical and don't care about material things." The constant guilt trips when I couldn't attend family events because I was working extra shifts, sacrificing my social life to pay for my education. The quiet shame I felt when I had to turn down a weekend trip with friends because it wasn't in my meticulously planned budget. While Derek was jet-setting on his latest business trip, it was all part of the same pattern. The realization was devastating, but also incredibly empowering. Liam was truly my rock throughout this entire process. He never pressured me to reconcile with my family or to move on before I was ready. Instead, he listened tirelessly, validated my feelings, and supported my journey towards setting healthy boundaries. He simply was there, a steady, loving presence. "I've been thinking about the wedding," I told him one evening, as we sat on our small apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling below. The idea of a grand celebration felt hollow now, contaminated by the recent events. He took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles gently. "Whatever you want to do is fine with me, Eleanor. We could postpone, have something smaller, or even elope. The important thing is that we're together, that we're building our life." His understanding brought tears to my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief, not sorrow. "I think I'd like something small," I confessed. "Just us and a few close friends. Maybe your parents. I don't think I'm ready to face my family at a wedding. Not that family, anyway." My mother continued to call and text daily, her messages oscillating wildly between desperate guilt trips. "I can't believe you'd abandon your father when he needs you most." "Not awkward." And frantic pleas. "Please, Eleanor, we're going to lose the house if you don't help with his legal fees. It's all going to fall apart." I maintained minimal contact, responding only to provide basic updates about my well-being, but refusing to engage in any discussions about money or my father's legal case. The boundary was firm, and though it hurt her, I knew it was essential for my own healing. Derek's situation deteriorated rapidly. Without my parents' financial support, and with his dubious business connections now under federal investigation, he found himself truly on his own for the first time in his life. He was forced to sell his luxury car, move out of his expensive apartment, and take a job as a bartender to make ends meet. He was raw, exposed, and utterly unprepared for real life. 3 months after the engagement party, he called me. Our conversations had been strained and infrequent, mostly brief, polite updates. But his tone was different this time, subdued, humble, almost. "I got a reality check," he admitted, without preamble, the usual bluster gone. "My landlord showed up with an eviction notice, and I realized I had nowhere to go. Mom and Dad can't take me in. All my friends who I thought were so solid suddenly don't return my calls now that I can't pick up the tab. It's like everyone's gone." "That sounds really hard, Derek," I said carefully, not wanting to offer false sympathy, but genuinely acknowledging his struggle. "Yeah," he sighed, the sound heavy. "Anyway, I found this studio apartment. It's kind of a dump, honestly, but it's what I can afford on my bartending salary. And I'm looking into night classes to get some kind of certification. Like, something practical. I figure I need a skill that actually pays." "That sounds like a good plan," I offered. A flicker of genuine hope for him. It was a small step, but it was a step. There was a long pause, filled only with the faint static of the phone line. "I never thanked you properly," he finally said, his voice rough, thick with uncharacteristic emotion, "for paying for that lawyer consultation when Dad was first arrested. I know you didn't have to do that." I had almost forgotten about that. In the immediate aftermath of the arrest, overwhelmed but still clinging to the hope that this was just a horrible misunderstanding, I had arranged and paid for an initial legal consultation for my father before the full extent of his crimes became clear. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You're welcome," I said quietly. "And I'm sorry," Derek continued, his voice softer, more sincere than I had ever heard it. "For everything, for the engagement party, for all the money over the years, for not seeing how hard you worked while I just took. I've been a shitty brother, Eleanor, I really have." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Not yet, but it was more accountability than Derek had ever shown before. It was a beginning. Thank you for saying that, I replied, a lightness blooming in my chest. It was a step towards real connection, however fragile. Meanwhile, I cautiously reconnected with extended family members who had been victims of my father's schemes. My Aunt Carol invited me to lunch, and we slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt our relationship. She shared stories about my father's youth, his upbringing, the immense pressure he faced from my grandfather to provide and succeed, to always be a man. Your grandfather was very hard on him about providing for his family, Eleanor, she explained. Her eyes filled with a familiar sadness. Nothing Arthur ever earned was enough. I think he's been trying to prove himself his whole life, that he's important, that he's a provider. Understanding didn't excuse his behavior, not for a second, but it helped me contextualize it, to see the deeper generational patterns. I wasn't ready to forgive, not entirely, but I was beginning to process my feelings in a healthier, more nuanced way. Months after the engagement party, my father accepted a plea deal. He would serve 18 months in a minimum security facility for the financial crimes, primarily the illegal gambling operation and money laundering. The assault charge resulted in probation, to be served after his release. He would also be required to pay restitution to the family members he had defrauded and attend mandatory financial counseling and gambling addiction treatment. It wasn't as harsh as I had initially thought it could be, given the federal involvement, but it was still a significant sentence. My mother was devastated by the sentence, claiming it would destroy what remained of our family. She had maintained her stance as my father's fierce defender throughout the proceedings, minimizing his actions and placing blame on everyone from the prosecutors to Derek's business partners to me for overreacting to the slap. She truly couldn't see his culpability, only his victimhood. Will you at least come say goodbye to him before he reports to prison next month? She begged during one of our infrequent phone calls, her voice thin and desperate. I considered it carefully, discussing the request with Dr. Thorne. I think I need closure, I decided, not for him, but for me, for my own peace. The meeting at my parents' house was tense and awkward. My father looked older than his 58 years, his face lined with stress and defeat, his usual bluster replaced by a sullen resignation. My mother hovered anxiously, repeatedly offering coffee and cookies, as if we were having a normal family visit, desperate to create an illusion of normalcy. Thank you for coming, Eleanor, my father said stiffly when we were finally seated in the living room, a forced politeness in his tone. Your mother thought it was important. I waited, hoping for an apology, an acknowledgement, anything that would indicate genuine remorse, a sliver of understanding for the pain he had caused. But my father just sat there, looking uncomfortable and slightly resentful, as if I was the one who had put him in this position. Is there something you wanted to say to me, Dad? I finally asked, my voice calm. He shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry things got so out of hand at your party. I was under a lot of pressure. It wasn't a real apology. It was another excuse, another attempt to minimize his actions, to shift blame. But I nodded, accepting that this was probably the best I would get, perhaps the only kind of apology he was capable of giving. I hope the counseling helps, Dad, I said, rising to leave. And I hope when you come home, you'll have found healthier ways to deal with pressure, for your sake, and for Mom's. As Liam and I left, my mother followed us to the door, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. He really is sorry, Eleanor, she insisted, as if to convince herself. He just doesn't know how to say it. I know, Mom, I said, giving her a brief, gentle hug. Take care of yourself while he's gone, okay? Focus on your own healing. You deserve that. In the car, Liam asked if I was all right. Actually, yes, I realized, a sense of lightness in my chest. I didn't get the apology I wanted, but I don't need it anymore. I know who they are now, I know who I am, and I know the kind of life and family I want to build going forward. It's not about their validation anymore. That evening, we revisited our wedding plans. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the Riverside Botanic Garden, with just 30 guests, including Liam's family and our closest friends. We would use part of my meticulously saved wedding fund for the celebration, putting another significant portion toward a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house, and use the remainder for my continued therapy and for building our new life together, carefully, intentionally. Are you sure? Liam asked, his voice filled with concern, echoing the question I knew was in his mind. That money was for your dream wedding, the big one. I smiled, feeling more certain, more at peace than I had in months. Dreams change, Liam, I said, intertwining my fingers with his. I don't need a fancy party to prove anything anymore. I just need us, building something healthy and real together. As we finalized our new wedding date, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a lightness I hadn't known in years. For the first time since the engagement party disaster, I was truly looking forward to the future again. 6 months after the engagement party that changed everything, Liam and I stood hand in hand in the Riverside Botanic Garden, surrounded by 30 of our most trusted friends and family members. The October afternoon was crisp and bright, with maple leaves in vibrant shades of red and gold, creating a natural canopy above us. The gentle rustle of falling leaves like a soft applause. I wore a simple ivory sheath dress that cost a fraction of the elaborate gown I had originally planned, but it felt perfect, effortlessly elegant. Liam was handsome in a charcoal suit with a blue tie that matched the late-season hydrangeas in my small, meaningful bouquet. As we exchanged vows spoken from the heart, I felt none of the anxiety that had plagued me in the weeks following my father's arrest. Instead, I was filled with a profound, calm certainty that I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the right person. This was our day, built on our terms. Liam's parents had been incredibly supportive throughout our reimagined wedding planning. Eleanor Hayes had helped me find my dress during a weekend shopping trip that became a healing experience in itself, filled with laughter and genuine connection. Marcus had insisted on contributing to our honeymoon, a quiet week-long trip to a charming coastal town rather than the expensive European tour we'd originally discussed. "We're so proud of both of you," Eleanor whispered as she embraced me after the ceremony, her eyes shining. "The way you've handled everything shows what a strong foundation you have. True strength isn't about how much you can endure, but how much you can grow." My mother attended the wedding alone, dressed conservatively, keeping mostly to herself. She had been making tentative efforts to rebuild our relationship, attending 3 family therapy sessions with me and Dr. Thorne. While progress was agonizingly slow, she had, little by little, begun to acknowledge her role as an enabler in our family's dysfunction. "You look beautiful, Eleanor," she told me during our mother-daughter dance, which had replaced the traditional father-daughter dance. Her voice was thick with emotion, but her eyes held a flicker of something new: understanding. "I'm trying to understand your choices better. Dr. Thorne is helping me see things differently." It was a small step, but it was a step. My father, 2 months into his 18-month sentence, had sent a brief formal note of congratulations via my mother. I had read it once, acknowledging the small step it represented, a sign that he was perhaps beginning his own journey toward accountability, and then tucked it away. His journey would be long and arduous, and I was no longer waiting for his approval or validation. My healing was my own. Derek had surprised me by declining his invitation to the wedding. "I don't think I'd make things better by being there, Elle," he had explained during one of our now monthly phone calls, his voice filled with an uncharacteristic humility. "I'm still working on my stuff, and this day should be happy for you. Only happy." It was perhaps the most mature, selfless decision my brother had ever made, and I respected him for it. He had been attending Financial Recovery Anonymous meetings, working steadily at the bar, and had even received a promotion to shift manager. Small steps, yes, but undeniably in the right direction. He was building his own life for the first time. After the ceremony, we gathered in the garden's glass-enclosed pavilion for dinner. The intimate setting allowed for genuine conversations rather than the superficial mingling of larger weddings. Sarah, who had stood beside me as my maid of honor, clinked her glass for a toast. "I've known Eleanor since college," she began, her voice warm and sincere. "She's always been the most determined, disciplined person I know. But this past year, I've seen a new kind of strength in her. The strength to stand up for herself, to redefine family on her own terms, and to choose joy, even after betrayal." She raised her glass, her eyes shining. "To Eleanor and Liam, may your marriage be built on the incredible foundation of respect, honesty, and true partnership that you've already established." As applause filled the pavilion, I leaned into Liam's embrace, thinking about how differently this day had turned out from what I had originally envisioned. The elaborate venue, the extensive guest list, the lavish details I had once thought essential, they had all fallen away, revealing what truly mattered: commitment, integrity, an authentic connection. My wedding fund, the very money that had triggered so much drama, had been reallocated. Some of it had indeed gone to therapy sessions, both individual and family. Another portion had been set aside as a down payment on the modest 3-bedroom house we had closed on last month, our quiet sanctuary. The remainder covered the smaller, more meaningful celebration, and I regretted none of these decisions. Every reallocation felt like an act of self-love, a reclamation of my own worth. During the months of healing and rebuilding, I had connected with other survivors of family financial abuse through an online support group recommended by Dr. Thorne. Their stories helped me realize how common this pattern was, how insidious, and how incredibly difficult it could be to break free from deeply ingrained family expectations, especially for women who are often conditioned to be caregivers and people pleasers. I had even begun volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults, sharing my experience as a cautionary tale while teaching practical budgeting skills, hoping to empower others to avoid similar pitfalls. As the evening progressed, and our guests enjoyed the simple but elegant dinner we had chosen, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The botanical garden was peaceful at dusk, with pathways lit by subtle ground lighting and the last rays of sun filtering through the trees. Liam found me there a few minutes later, draping his jacket around my shoulders against the October chill. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, his eyes searching mine. I turned to look at him, this man who had stood by me through the most challenging year of my life, my steadfast partner. "Not one," I answered honestly. "I wish things had been different with my family, Liam. I wish my father had been the man I thought he was growing up. But I don't regret standing my ground. And I definitely don't regret marrying you today. Exactly like this." He smiled, a deep, contented smile, pulling me close. "I'm so proud of you, Eleanor. I know this year has been incredibly hard." "It has," I acknowledged, leaning my head on his shoulder, "but it's also been clarifying. I know now that respect can't be bought. Boundaries aren't selfish, and real love doesn't come with financial strings attached." We returned to our reception, where our chosen family awaited. My colleague from the lab had brought her homemade tiramisu instead of a store-bought gift, a gesture of affection. Liam's college roommate was teaching his grandparents how to do the Macarena, resulting in peals of laughter that echoed through the pavilion. My mother was engaged in what appeared to be a genuine conversation with Eleanor Hayes, perhaps finding common ground as mothers-in-law, sharing stories beyond the shadow of our past. This was what family could be, I realized. Not perfect, certainly not without challenges, but built on mutual respect rather than obligation and fear. As Liam and I cut our small wedding cake, a simple vanilla confection adorned with fresh berries, I thought about the journey ahead. We would build our life together deliberately, making conscious choices rather than blindly following prescribed paths. I no longer felt the desperate need to prove my worth through an expensive wedding or to earn my family's approval through financial sacrifice. The freedom in that realization was perhaps the greatest gift of this difficult year. Later that night, as we danced under the string lights to our last song, I whispered to Liam, "Thank you for helping me learn what real family means." He kissed my forehead gently, his arms wrapped securely around me. "We're just getting started," he promised. And as our guests surrounded us with love and well wishes, their faces beaming, I knew it was true. The family we would build together would have different values, different patterns, and different definitions of loyalty than the one I had grown up in. That family had been built on financial dependence, unspoken obligations, and the fear of saying no. Ours would be built on mutual support, honest communication, and the freedom to set healthy boundaries. The road to healing would be long. My relationship with my parents and brother would continue to evolve, I knew, with setbacks and difficult conversations alongside moments of genuine connection. But I had taken the first and hardest step, standing up for myself and refusing to participate in destructive patterns, even when it meant facing rejection and anger from those I had been taught to please at all costs. As we bid farewell to our guests and prepared to begin our married life, driving away from the illuminated garden, our simple, perfect reception finished, our new life together just beginning, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The $50,000 wedding fund that had triggered so much drama had ultimately given me something far more valuable than the perfect celebration: It had given me the chance to redefine family on my own terms. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, reaching across the console to take my hand as we drove. "I'm thinking that sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most important growth," I replied, squeezing his hand. "And I'm thinking how grateful I am that we get to decide what our future looks like together, every single detail."